Good afternoon. Welcome to SWEM Library. I'm Carrie Cooper, and I'm Dean of University Libraries, and I'm excited to welcome you to our Fall 2025 Special Collections Exhibition event. The Scope series is a wonderful way to highlight our collections and the people whose stories reside here. Today, we are thrilled to highlight the research done by Alison Herring. Alison earned her master's degree in accounting from William & Mary in 2000. After working in accounting for over a decade, she made a career pivot to independent researcher. Alison is currently researching the Powell Family papers held at SWEM Library. Alison is writing a nonfiction account of this family, and we have been with her every step of the way, applauding and inspired by her passion for history and the fascinating women in the Powell family. Alison is also a valued member of our Library Advisory Board, our Library Board of Directors, where her experience in the corporate world and her work as a historical researcher contribute much to our discussions. Today's event is part of the library's effort to highlight the unique special collections that strengthen the reputation of SWEM Library and William & Mary. I want to thank Kelvin Ramsey, our library's board member also, an exceptional volunteer in special collections, for conceiving of this event series and sharing his idea with us so that we could bring it to you. Now, please join me in welcoming Alison Herring.
We're going to see, how is the sound? Because I have a booming voice, right? You can hear me in the back. All right, good.
That was to turn off the microphone, and I couldn't do it. So.
All right. Oh, I just got my glasses tangled in this. But if that's the only, that's the only thing that goes wrong, that's all right. All right. Thank you all. I want to thank everybody for being here. Some of you have traveled in from quite a long distance, including Katie up here up front. She's driven 3 hours to be here today. So and everybody who did all the work to make this happen, all of the marketing work, all of the logistics, everything. You all did such a fabulous job, and I'm really, really grateful. I'm also just thankful for the opportunity to be able to present my research. When I first started doing this is not something I could have conceived of as being possible. I was just a volunteer. So I'm going to kick off with giving a high-level overview of where the presentation is going before I introduce myself more thoroughly. So where this presentation is going, let me see, does the clicker, wait, which one is the, there it goes. Okay. All right. So I'm going to start off with a high-level overview of where we're going. I'm going to start with an origin story of how all of this got started, and then I'm going to introduce the Powells to you, and we're going to talk about the Powell family papers and what I mean when I say that. And then we're going to give a very high-level overview of their Civil War experience, because that's the genesis of how I got involved in this. And then we're going to pull back from their Civil War experience and talk about how big this project has grown and what it has become today. And then I'm going to introduce Ariana Russell Bingham to you. This is a woman who 3 generations of her family were enslaved by 2 generations of the Powells. And I've been very, very fortunate that I've been able to piece together as much information about her as I have. And I'm going to introduce her near the end, because on the timeline that I've got today, when I show you where the Powells were from, it makes more sense to do that, and it also helps give her the last word. And then we will end on a famous descendant, which if you have been involved in this project, you already know who it is. If you haven't, you get a treat at the end of this. All right, a couple of themes that I wanted to mention up front that I hope come through the presentation include how vital libraries are to this work. Previously, my understanding of a library was what I had growing up and in school, a place where I would go check out books to read. But there are also community centers, and there are researchers and professionals that work at libraries that inform what I do, and my work isn't possible without them. Genealogy is also vital to understanding any research of people or events or places. If you don't do the thorough genealogy of the people involved, you're going to miss a lot. It would be like in my accounting world, doing the accounting with the debits but not the credits. I mean, you could, but it's not. You're not going to have all the information that you need, and it's probably not going to be accurate. And so genealogy is critical. I'll tell a quick story on myself. When I went up to a genealogical library, I walked through the door. It was a Thomas Balch library. And when I went, they said, "Oh, are you here to do genealogy?" And I said no, because I thought genealogy meant somebody researching their great-great-grandpappy. So I said no. but I'm here to research this Powell family. So I'm hoping you have like death records, burial, like the woman, she was very sweet and was like, we have a new one. And so it was a while before I realized that the research that I was doing is genealogy. And so it's vital, vital, vital. And also the importance of local history communities and being plugged into local history communities where you're performing research. Okay, so introduction. My name is Alison Herring. I'm from Little Rock, Arkansas originally, and I got my undergraduate degree in accounting at the University of Arkansas, and I came here, as Dean Cooper said, to get my master's degree in accounting in 2000. That was the first year they had the M.Acc program, and I thought, what a cool thing to be a part of something inaugural at an institution as old as William and Mary. So I had a long career in accounting at a Big Four public accounting firm, and I normally don't mention it, but because most of you in here know me from the business school, it was KPMG for 16 years. And I worked in the audit practice, and I worked in the Richmond office for 10 years. And then I got a pretty big promotion and a pretty big opportunity to lead a software deployment for the US firm. I was in charge of the support element. It was the biggest change in the history of the audit practice of KPMG, and I needed to move to Dallas to do it. So I moved to Dallas and was among strangers, getting used to a new city, when tragedy struck my life. We lost 3 immediate family members in a few months. And I didn't have the support system that all of us think that we would have. I didn't have my close friends. I didn't have my colleagues. In Richmond, I didn't have my faith-based community or my neighbors. And so I was going through this among strangers. And the role that I was in at the time, thank God, was my wheelhouse, and it involved helping people. And I really am a believer in helping people helps us get through really hard times. And that helped me a lot. And so I worked a lot, but I needed a hobby. I needed something to do outside of work rather than find the end of Netflix. And so that's how this got started. And it all has its roots in William and Mary libraries. So in this picture here, you see Anne and Mark Woolley, and then at the far end is Van Black. They are members of the class of 1975. And when they had their 40th reunion year, they decided to come up with a program, and they called it the Staying Connected Campaign. And they ran it for 5 years, where they wanted to give back to the university. Van left his job to do this and run this full time. And they were looking for ways to help people further away from the university stay engaged at William and Mary through dozens of opportunities to do that. And so they just were coordinating it, and they had a whole strategic initiative. And at that time, William and Mary libraries put their Civil War archive online for transcription, and their Civil Rights archive online. I said it out of order. For the Civil Rights Movement, it was the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Movement, and then it was the 150th anniversary for the Civil War. So they had come up with the name From Fights to Rights, and literally it was having people sign up. You could transcribe old letters and make them more easily available to researchers. And so they sent an email out, and it was like an answered prayer that I didn't even know I had, because I thought, well, I need some friends, so I'm going to go to this. And these are people I'm going to have something in common with. And then they started telling us about this project. And this is what it literally looks like. You pull up a letter, and they encouraged us to download them on PDF and put them up on another screen so you can kind of zoom in. And then you type what the letters say. And you hit return at the end of every line so that the rows match the rows in the letter. That's a critical point. Because if you got to go back and double check something, you don't want to be hunting all around the letter for it. And so they put us through like some do's and don'ts, a little training. I think I had to sign something, and so because they were giving us accounts to be able to log into at William & Mary to do this. And so a bunch of people that day signed up, and I was like, well, this is something I can do from home. And I was going through so much grief at the time. I didn't have normal answers to small talk questions, so it's kind of hard to be out making friends when your answers to the questions are kind of weird. So this was something I could just do from home. And so I just signed up, and I would do like a letter a week. And I ultimately landed on the letters of Harriet Lee Powell, and this is an image of her. Her writing stood out like a firecracker in the sky. Like I had been transcribing lots and lots of letters, but hers stood out. Her writing style stood out. She's an epic storyteller. She's very detailed in her letters. She's very gossipy in her letters. Very, very, very gossipy. And her tragedy was the same as mine. She had lost, a lot of her family had died, and she was having to support herself during the Civil War by teaching and forming schools, teaching young women through the Civil War, and she was doing this among strangers. And so she had a lot to say about compounding loss and doing this in an environment where she had to muscle up and get through it. And in case this doesn't sound like the geekiest thing ever, it really was like reading a novel. Like, I got hooked because, there was a guy that was courting her, and I kind of wanted to know, like, did she marry him or did she not? Luckily, she didn't. I didn't like that guy. Her brother was missing. Like, there were reports that, oh no, like, he was killed. But then there were other reports that were like, no, we saw him. He's alive. It's fine. So you just, like, you get sucked into reading a novel or like a Netflix series, and you want to know how it pans out. And so I decided to stick with her because I found her so compelling and her letters were so fun. And so I transcribed her letters. Oops. This is an example of a crossed letter. This is just something that they did a lot in that era. They would write one direction across all of the pages, and then they would turn it and write across it the other way. There's a myth that they did this because there was a paper shortage and money was tight during the Civil War. But they did this long before the war. Wealthy people did this who had ample supply of paper. It had more to do with the logistics of the envelope. Their envelopes were very small. And you're only fitting so much paper into that envelope before it busts. So that I'm convinced that it had more to do with the logistics of the paper than it did anything else. And I gave this presentation to my best friend, Nadia Rogers, the other night, and one of her questions, she thought I needed to add this. She said, how long does it take to transcribe letters like this? And she thought I needed to add this, so shout out to Nadia that we did. So if a letter has really good handwriting, it's like 10 to 15 minutes for me. I can get through it pretty quickly. If it's a crossed letter like this, closer to 30 to 45 minutes. If the handwriting is bad, all bets are off because it gets very frustrating, and you just have to, transcribe what you can, put it down, and come back later. Otherwise, you'll drive yourself mad. And so I've gotten really good and disciplined about just putting those down, calming down, and coming back later and not being so mad about the handwriting. Okay, so what I've made clear so far is that I had a career in public accounting, and I was doing this as a hobby, and now they've flipped. So I now do this research full time, and I'm still a CPA, and I'm still plugged into the accounting world in many ways, but I do that less now, and I do this research full time. So I made a transition, if I could call this like how it started versus how it's going. And a very quick shout out, because when you make a big career shift like that, that's scary, especially since I didn't have a background in it. I had absolutely no idea how to do this or how to go about it. And if it hadn't been for the wisdom of Elizabeth Foster, who's here today, I don't think I would have had the courage to be able to do it. She was a partner at KPMG, so I knew her at the firm, and then she was a professor here at William & Mary, and we had lunch one day, and she was very encouraging. She said, just give it a year, give it 2 years, just see where it goes. And she didn't think it was weird. So anyways, thank you, Elizabeth. So we owe you a debt. So let's meet the Powells that I keep mentioning. And to set your expectations, there's lots of Powells, but we're going to talk about 2 parents, and then there's 6 children. And so we're going to meet mom and dad first. So this is Selena Lloyd and her husband, Charles Powell. And you can see from their birth years and death years, they effectively lived through the entire 19th century. I mean, he pretty much made it. He almost made it to the 20th century. They were both from Alexandria. They were both from very elite families, like FFV level families in Virginia. And we did not know what she or he looked like until not that long ago. A man in Mississippi who was a collector had a collection of Powell images. He's not a descendant. He's just a big collector. And he found my website and reached out and wanted to know, gosh, what should I do with this collection? And we decided, why don't you just donate it to William & Mary? And he did. And it was a very generous thing to do. His name is Jack Rogers, super delightful man. And right now, this is the only known image of the matriarch, Selena Lloyd Powell. So it is marvelous that we have this, because this is a woman's collection. The name Selena Lloyd Powell goes down several generations, so I would refer to her as Selena Powell the First. And so the fact that this image survives and it came to us, we're very, very thankful for that, and that we have this image of Charles. And so these are part of the R. Jackson Rogers collection of the Powell family papers. And then now let's meet their children, the ones who at least made it to adulthood. Their oldest is Rebecca Katharine Powell. She's kind of a typical oldest daughter. She natural leader, very formidable. She ran a school for women in Alexandria for over 50 years. And then the second is, we've already met her. That's Harriet Lee Powell. She's the one that I focus on. She's the social butterfly of the family. They had a younger brother, Lloyd. whose letters rival Hattie's. They almost are really good examples of American literature. They could be published on their own. His letters are that good, and the content is good because they explain his travels in the West in the 1850s. And he's just a delightful, very humble young man. They had a younger sister, Mary Emily, or Minna. No known image survives of her. She died as a teenager when they were living in Illinois. They have a younger brother, Charlie Jr. He also was killed during the war. He was studying accounting, so after my own heart, this one. And then there's the baby of the family, Nina. She was Selena Lloyd II. They called her Nina, and she's the only one of the family that has descendants today. None of the others have any descendants. Mainly, I mean, the boys died early, Minna died early. Rebecca was very independent and made her own money, and I think didn't want to lose that. And in those days, if you got married, your property transferred to your spouse. She probably died of the flu in 1918. She might have, yeah, you've pointed out, she could have, that was the flu pandemic, and it could be that she did die in the flu pandemic. I don't think I've seen a death record for her, so I don't know it's a good guess, yeah. The one who outlived them all was Rebecca, the oldest. She made it to 1921. Yeah, and I also want to introduce, while we're introducing the family, Ariana Russell Bingham, who was vital to the Powells. This is a painting from A Visit from Old Mistress by Winslow Homer. It's an 1876 image. It's a Virginia image, and I'm in touch with her descendant. It's actually several descendants, but I've got one that's kind of my main contact, and we wanted an image to use to portray her, and this is the one that we settled on, so I want to be respectful and acknowledge that. I have his input and collaboration on picking an image to use to represent her. And these are her children. We're going to go over them later. And then the names at the bottom are more people that the Powells enslaved that I've not been able to identify, but I probably will. I've had pretty good luck in this, and I am engaged with a community in Southwest Loudoun, so I probably will be able to identify them at some time. So they are Faye, Lucinda, Margaret, and her daughter Maria, a little girl named Puss, a man named Tom, and a man named Franklin. But we're going to get to Ariana a bit later. And obviously the Powells enslaved far more people than this, and I do know who those people are. These are just the ones that the parents and the 6 children had. Why is that cut off? We won't worry about that. All right, so the Powell Family Papers. So when I talk about the Powell Family Papers, what I'm talking about, it's a collection of documents. It's about 700 items, and the 700 items make up about 3,600 pages of content. And it's a women's collection. So 67% of the collection is written by women. And then regarding what my work on the Powells is, the job that I have made for myself is I get the letters transcribed, and I am researching the places where they live. The Powells were a very unconventional family for the 19th century. I think they'd be unconventional today. They were constantly on the move. They lived in a dozen different places. So I'm constantly on the move, trying to research all of the places that they lived. And I'm researching the family in general and the events of their lives and the people that they enslaved and the wider community. Because I'm a big believer personally, my personal opinion is it is unwise or very difficult to research enslaved people without researching the surrounding community with it. And that's why you've got to be engaged with other researchers who are doing research on neighboring plantations and other families, because you need to be working in collaboration with them, because they're going to find things that inform my work, and I find things that inform their work. And so we are in constant collaboration with each other. And I am writing a nonfiction book. So let's kick off with their Civil War experience, because that was the genesis of this. That's what William and Mary put online. They were in Winchester when the war broke. They lived there beginning in 1856, where they formed a school for girls, elite girls. So families from across Virginia were sending their daughters to this school. And that was an unfortunate place to be living on the eve of the Civil War, because if you know even a little bit about the Civil War, Winchester changed hands more times in the war than any other place. So this was a war zone. You can't have a boarding school in a war zone. So they shut it down, and they fled March 10th, 1862. And I want to give a shout out to Karen and Jean Schultz, who are alumni. They're also members of the class of 75. They live in Winchester, and their friendship, support, and encouragement has meant a lot to me. And I'm very, very grateful. So they fled Winchester. They had to. And so when they fled, they scattered all over the state. And you can see how many places they were. Like, this is Civil War Central. So I like to call them the Forrest Gump of the war, because if there was something happening in the Civil War in Central Virginia, the Powells or one of them, either witnessed it, was in close proximity to it, and they definitely wrote about it. So a lot of Civil War history from a civilian perspective is in the Powell family papers, and they were usually in more than one location. They didn't stay in one location for all that long because it was a war and there were things that would drive them to move to different locations. But this gives you an idea of how far and wide they lived. But we're just going to focus on two locations, Powhatan County and Brunswick County. So this is a home that's called Blenheim. And backing up a moment, I got started on this when I was living in Dallas, but then I moved back to Virginia with my career in 2014. And since I was back here geographically, things started to escalate because I felt like, well, I've typed her letters, now where was she geographically? And I tried really hard to find Blenheim. We all thought it was a town, all of us did. But it's not, and I finally had to give up and just focus again on the genealogy of the people she was living with. She lived with a family, Joseph Virginius Hobson and his wife Maria Bullock Hobson, and their children. And when I was doing the genealogy, the nutshell version is I landed on a document that was explaining Blenheim, and I realized, oh, Blenheim's a house. And then when it was a form, I thought, well, is there an address? And there was. And so Google Maps, and it's still standing. And as you can see, it's in beautiful condition. The original portion dates to 1732, 1733. But there was an addition made to it in about 1812, and it exists largely as it did when Hattie lived there during the war. Now, I wanted to see the front of the house, but I was going to have to trespass to do that. Plus, that's weird to stand in front of your house, and there's a lady out there taking pictures. So I wrote them a letter, and I had an address, but I didn't know how to address it. So I just said, to the owners of to the owners of Blenheim, and sent the letter. And Doug Brush, who is here today, the owners of Blenheim are here. This is Doug and Linda Brush. In the black blazer and the printed dress. They are here today. So I wrote the letter, Doug called, and the nutshell version is he said, yeah, come on out. I'm gonna make dinner, bring some friends. I mean, straight up. I was like, okay, that sounds great. So I took two friends with me, and he gave us a tour of the whole home. I mean, he took us through everywhere. And it was wild because I knew this house very well from Hattie's letters. Again, she's very detailed. And so walking around the house, and listening to everything he's saying, my mind is also like, I know what happened there. I know what happened there. This is where that happened. And before I went, I thought, I can't just show up at this man's house and tell him these stories and then leave. So I thought I should probably give him a book of letters. And the book looks like this. I made one for myself later because once I gave it to him, I was like, oh, now I don't have it anymore. So I made one, and I put her image. This is a younger image of Hattie because we didn't have the older image of Hattie at the time. And so I made a book of the letters. I asked William and Mary, can I do that? Can I share transcriptions? And generosity is a core value of William and Mary Libraries. It's a core value of Dean Cooper. And they said, of course you can. And then I said, well, what about scans of the originals? Of course you can. And so I made a book of that, and I put all that together, but also it's a big book, so I made like an executive summary in case he was having a cocktail party and just wanted to visit the quick hits. So I made that for him. So I made him a book of the letters to tell him anything he'd ever want to know about the history of that house during the Civil War. Hattie Powell wrote it down. Couple of things about her life there before I move on to the second location. When she arrived, the oldest Hobson daughter died immediately within days of her arrival. Terrible tragedy for this family. And so she's already going through her own drama. She's lost her brother, she's lost her sister, she lost her school in Winchester, and she's separated from her family, and she's got to muscle up and figure out a way to form a school and among strangers she doesn't know. And they've had this tragedy happen. But she muscled up and she did it. She formed the school. There were also lots of wounded soldiers recuperating in the area. That was common everywhere in Virginia. And as soon as they became mobile, they became a part of the rhythm of the local area life of visiting one another. So there's lots of flirtations, and there's guys she doesn't like. That's how we know where she was in the house, because she escaped one of them. And based on her escape route, we were able to figure out she had to be in this part of the house. She also just writes down this their daily life. Really, the letters will say, we get up at this time, we breakfast at this time, we have dinner at this time, this is when it's detailed. It's marvelous. So this is one example of her writing, and the letters, they are dark. It's a very dark time, and a lot of dark things are happening, and they are very dark. but I'm not sending everybody away with a rock in your stomach. So they are also very light because life was going on, and they read like a Jane Austen novel. So here's an example I'm going to read because it's worth it. She says, Fanny and I both lost our hearts with Lieutenant B. He is very handsome, waits on ladies more agreeably than anyone I ever saw, and would sit for hours and entertain us in the most impartial and agreeable manner. Conversation just seemed to flow out of his mouth without the least effort. And she goes on, I'll spare you the rest, but she goes on to describe all the other men at this party. And the party goes on all night, and they left the next day. That was common. So here she ends. I couldn't resist this. She says, we stayed there all night, and when we left at 12 the next day, Mr. M kissed me. I tell you, I did not like that so much, for he had been drinking. And so she writes like she talks, and you can hear, it's just like you can hear her when she does this. And they did this on purpose, because when they were writing letters to one another, they knew that it was part of their entertainment in the evening to read letters aloud to the family and other people. So that's one of the reasons that she wrote it, knowing that they were going to be reading them aloud. I included this picture for fun. The Powhatan County Historical Society had us out to do an event for me to present. We're going to get to Kelly Tucker in a moment. She attended this event. This is Blenheim. Doug and Linda Brush were very gracious and generous and hosted the event at Blenheim in the front yard. And they did give tours. And obviously the marvelous Susan Riggs made, the archivist here, who's everyone's favorite, made the trip. And I love that she did that. So I thought I was done. I mean, I made the book, I'd given it to them, and I was back to work at KPMG. But there was another house where she was before she was at Blenheim, and it's just kind of like, I don't know, you give a mouse a cookie and things escalate. And so it became like a challenge, like, can I find Rome? And I don't have time to go into the details, so if you have questions about how I was able to find it, you can ask, because Rome is no longer lived in. There's not a modern address, so I had to get real creative and real local to be able to track it down. But I did, and Hattie lived with a Tucker family at Rome. And when I found the property and there's no address, there's no mailbox, how do you contact the owners? What I decided to do, because it was during the holiday season, was I made a wreath and hung it on the gate, because I thought I don't want to attract unwanted attention. Like balloons seemed kind of wild, and so I thought, well, a wreath is going to be ignored by everybody except for the property owners. A property owner is going to investigate a wreath. And I could tell that people were on and off this property regularly. There were Black Angus beef cattle in a field nearby. They were separated from the house and the wreath. I didn't want to poison a cow. And so they were in a different field. I really made sure of that. I was like, I'm not having this on my conscience. And so I put the letter in some plastic, and then I hid it in the leaves, and then just had to wait. While I was at the house, you can see the house in the background. I'm going to show a better image of it in a moment. It's no longer lived in today. It's a difficult floor plan. I mean, I myself live in a modern house. I like modern plumbing and modern electrical. But there was this do not trespass sign, and it had the name Tucker on it. And that is the moment where the hair on my neck stood up, and I thought, get out, could the same family own this property that owned it during the Civil War? Yes. The same family owns it today. And so when I was already making the book of letters, I had faith that I was going to hear back from them from the wreath. And I thought, gosh, this is not just the history of their house. This is their family. These are their ancestors. And a man named Lewis Tucker is the one who contacted me. And I want to mention him today. And it was the most fun voicemail I've ever gotten. I saved it, actually, because it's hilarious. He was a fun guy, and we recently lost him. And that is a tragic loss to his family. It's a tragic loss for me and my project. It's a tragic loss for the community. And given that this was a recent loss, I want to acknowledge it and say to his wife, Lisa, and his children, Lindy, Carly, and Lewis, how sorry we all are for Lewis's loss. I'm thankful I met him, and I'm thankful I spent as much time with him as I did. So I met the family for lunch one day. They picked some cousins and spouses, and when they picked a restaurant, and we picked a day that worked for everybody, and I went out and I met with them, and I gave them a book of letters, and we toured the house. And this is the house, and it is as Hattie knew it. We know that the front part of the house was on it during the Civil War, and so was the back part. It had 2 separate staircases, and the upstairs are not connected. And so we know Hattie lived in the front part of the house, not the back. But Hattie hit the jackpot when she landed with the Tuckers at Rome. Now, I've told this out of order. I've told it in the order that I found it, but this is where she landed when she fled Winchester. Winchester's way up in the tippy-top part of the state. This house is down almost near the North Carolina line. Like, it is in Brunswick County, so she went pretty far. And when she landed here, Mary Eliza Tucker was the mom of the household, and she was angelically sweet to Hattie. I mean, went out of her way to be kind to this young woman who she had never met, didn't know from anybody, and she let her live in this home. They fed her, and she had her teaching her 2 children, Maria and Willie. Hattie recorded everything, just like at Blenheim. Daily life, family quirks. We all have them. We all have our little family oddities, and she wrote those down. And this is a really fun example. You know, those little children will parrot the things that you say, but they don't get the context quite right. So there was a little 6-year-old Willie who was absolutely in love with Hattie. He adored her, and he was always trying to manipulate her to play with him. And so his threat was, he would say, "Miss Hattie, if you don't obey, or if you don't play with me, I'm going to come over there and kiss you." So that's not a very effective threat, but it clearly was for him, and so you can sense that's what his mother said. His mother, some things don't change. She must have said, "If you don't get in this wagon." And it's a cute way to say, "I'm going to come up there and kiss you," and that clearly worked, and so he thought it was going to work on her. So just a cute example of kids don't change. And this is one example of her writing from Rome. This is an example of how she sets the scene and how detailed she is and just how sweet this family is. Hattie's mother was supposed to come and visit her and help her get settled in this new place, as all mothers would, but she decided she just couldn't pull it off and had written to her to tell her, "I can't come." So here's Hattie's reaction and how she tells it. She said, "When your first letter came telling me you had concluded not to come, Willie brought the letter to my room." Remember, he's the little boy. "Willie brought the letter to my room, laid himself on the bed while I read it, saying, 'Tell me, Miss Powell, is your ma coming?' When I told him no, Maria suggested I would cry." Maria is going through it. She's having a hard time. She's a teenager, and she is not happy with Hattie being there at all. And she gives her a lot of trouble. So but Hattie has an enormous amount of empathy and compassion for her, and she doesn't like it when the Tucker parents get mad at her, because she feels like you're just going to make it worse. Just let her be. But then, so after Maria has suggested she's going to cry, Willie's arm was around my neck in an instant, and his face close up to mine. "Miss Powell, don't you be so sorry. You are staying with we all." Sweet thing for a 6-year-old. And that is, the Tuckers are here today. I haven't mentioned that yet. We have 4 representatives of the Tuckers here. So Willie was their great-grandfather, right? Willie, right? You too? Mm-hmm. Cute. This is the extended Tucker family. They frankly adopted me. I even spent Thanksgiving with them one year when I had a flight snafu. Susan's always told me, like, you can come. And one year I had a flight happen and was like, I may have to take her up on it. And so I did. So that's Thanksgiving over there on the right. And Lewis was there, and so I was just extra glad I went, extra glad Susan invited me so I could spend more time with Lewis. And I can't move on past the Tuckers without giving, wow. I'm not sure why that didn't work out. Without giving a shout out to Katie Jackson Johnson. She's sitting right up here in a gray jacket. She's a teacher, and I met her through the Tuckers. One of the Tuckers had reached out, had come to work and was telling Katie the story of, like, this lady found our house and she made this book of letters. I don't even know how that conversation went, but Katie is a history teacher and political science teacher, right? Do I have that right? Yeah, and she said, well, I'm gonna have her come talk to my students. And so Jane put her in touch with me, and I, at the time, was still working full-time at KPMG, and I thought, if there's an audience, there's not an audience harder than a group of teenagers. And I thought, all right, I'll go. And we didn't even meet until that day. I came to the school, and that's when I met Katie, and she's driven 3 hours to be here, so if you get a chance to shake her hand and give her a hug, please do. She is delightful, and she gave me technically my very first speaking engagement ever was because of Katie. So thank you, sweetie. And we're going to pull back from the Civil War now, and I'm just going to explain at a high level how big this project has grown. And we're not going to go through all of this, but this is just a montage of images to try to convey that this has gotten far bigger than just the Civil War. It's gotten far bigger than just Rome and Blenheim, far bigger than even just Virginia. So and I've also been able to build a network of colleagues. So when I left my career, I thought, well, I don't have an undergraduate degree in history or a master's degree or a PhD, and I'm very respectful of the fact that credentials matter. So that's why when Dean Cooper introduced me, she uses the term independent researcher, because that's as close as I'll get. Because and I'm very clear about what lane I'm in, because I know a lot of academic historians, I'm in community with them, and I respect that I'm different and I'm unconventional. But I have built a network of colleagues. It's what started with William and Mary Libraries, has grown to include the Virginia Piedmont Heritage Area. That is a big organization that does a lot of work in Northern Virginia, and they have been fabulous with me. The Thomas Balch Library, that's a genealogical library. That's the one where I went in and was like, no, I'm not doing genealogy, but I need to do this research on this family. So they have been critical. Also, the Afro-American Historical Association of Fauquier County, that was my first public speaking engagement. Katie was my first one, but the first time I spoke to the public was through the Afro-American Historical Association of Fauquier County. And I'm an active volunteer with them, and I participated in a bunch of their projects and grants. And they have done, their work helps me, my work helps them, and that's just part of the community that I'm a part of. And really interestingly, the Episcopal Church is involved too. The Diocese of Virginia, there's several churches that are involved. The Diocese of Kentucky, particularly Christ Church Episcopal Cathedral in downtown Louisville, because the Powells did live in Louisville for a time. Yep. That was a story that had to hit the cutting room floor, so if you want to ask about that, you might win an award. So the Powells, I've mentioned, they lived all over the place, right? You've already heard all the places in Virginia, and they lived in Louisville. They also lived in a place called Henry, Illinois, and I had a wild William and Mary coincidence happen when I went out there. I got on a plane and went out there. It's a teeny tiny little town. It's a steamboat town on the Illinois River. It's about an hour north of Peoria, so I stayed in Peoria, and the Powell home is still standing. It's in gorgeous shape because it was a funeral home for most of its life. And so it was a business, so they, generating income. Yeah, and the owners previously were Joe and Anna, and I'm with them. I gave them a book of letters written written by the Powells, so that's another example of special collections here going out into the community. They had me stay at their house, because the second time I went, I gave a presentation with the Marshall County Historical Society. That was a sellout crowd because they were fascinated by this family, and that they recorded pretty much everything that you'd want to know about the founding and the start of Henry, Illinois, and all the gossipy, delicious details where I'm confident those people are in God's kingdom somewhere thinking, thank God I lived before the age of social media, but like the Powells are like, not really. So anyways, I went into the Henry Public Library, and there was a woman there who greeted me very warmly. Her name is Ruby Young. Her grandfather was Dean Dudley Woodbridge of the law school. Isn't that wild? That is not just a dean. He was the dean of the law school that made the law school, many will say, made the law school what it is today. And if you mention his name anywhere on campus, people have this big reaction, including one of my favorite friends, the late Howard Busby, would always brighten up whenever I would mention Dean Woodbridge. So the fact that I met when I came back to campus and was telling this story, people couldn't believe that I'd met Dean Woodbridge's granddaughter working in the library all the way out there in Henry, Illinois. And the home has changed ownership from Joe and Anna to another couple, Sean and Stacy Kemp, who I met in a wild coincidence. They were in Leesburg, Virginia, the same weekend that I was there. It was the same weekend that you and I hung out, yeah. So they were in town, and they called me, and I was like, you're where? And so when Joe and Anna sold them the home, they gave them the book. And so they have the book of letters too. And so this is us standing in front of the Powells' home in Leesburg, and elements of that home inspired the Powells building this home. So they were able to, I had already been in that home, so I took a lot of pictures of the interior of that house. That's lived in by a private family. And I was able to show them, see this is what Selena wanted to build in your home, and that's why you have that element, and it came from this home. Really cool weekend. Yeah, and they were a really fun couple. I've been really grateful to get to know them. Okay, as I'm getting close to wrapping up, we want to cover Ariana Russell Bingham. Now, I only discovered her maiden name a few months ago through dumb luck. I got very lucky. She was the daughter of a woman named Jenny Russell and a man named Thomas. Now, I don't know Thomas's surname. It could have been that he used Russell, but I know Jenny did, and I know where the Russell name came from. And Ariana, her first child, I mentioned the Powells moved to Louisville, Kentucky for 2 years. Her first child was conceived and born in Louisville, Kentucky, and his name was Macon Thomas Russell, and he lived all the way out till 1920. In fact, his granddaughter died in 2007. So to try to think about, some will say this was a long time ago, and it's really not. And then her other children, she met and married Charles Bingham when they moved back. Well, I'm going to go through that in a moment. Sorry, these are the rest of her children. William Bingham, where did William go? Oh, there he is. Okay, sorry, we have Nancy, William Bingham. Today's his birthday, actually. We know the day he was born. The Powells recorded it, all about the birth in the papers. Ellen Bingham, and then these two, the spacing got off. These two are twin girls, Ariana and Susanna Bingham were her twins. And so these were her children. So as I'm going to tell you her story, let me give you a little quick geographic area, just in case you are familiar with Northern Virginia. If you're not, it doesn't really matter. So this is where Langolan is the plantation that was where Charles Powell grew up. His parents built the Langolan plantation. And so this, you see Upperville here, that's in northern Fauquier County. Route 50 is roughly the county line. And so Route 50, so Middleburg is just off the screen to the far. And if another famous location is Mount Weather, like the not-so-secret government compound, that borders Langolan. So that kind of gives you a sense, and it's sitting at the foot of the Blue Ridge Mountains, and you can see it from all over this area. Like if there's a rise in the hill, I mean, all over this area, when you look towards the Blue Ridge, you can see Langolan. Beautiful estate. So Ariana was born in 1816 at Langolan, which was a plantation in Loudoun County. You now have gotten oriented as to where that is. As I've said, she was the daughter of Jenny Russell and a man named Thomas. So she and her parents were enslaved by Charles's parents, Cuthbert Powell and his wife Katharine Powell. Now she was removed from her family when she was about 14 years old in 1830, when she was given to Charles Powell and his wife Selina, the year they got married, when they were setting up household. Same thing had happened to her mother when her mother was 14. Now Ariana avoided a worst case scenario in that the Belfield plantation where Charles and Selina were setting up household was across the street from Langolan. So she was still in her community, but that's not where anybody wants their 14-year-old little girl to be. So from door to door to the house, from Belfield is also standing. It's about 2.5, 3 miles door to door. So she lived at Belfield for several years with the Powells, and then they moved to Louisville, Kentucky in the 1830s, and that is where she had her firstborn child. We don't know the circumstances of that. We don't know the father, but we know that the father was from Kentucky, that he was a man in Kentucky. She had a force about her. She's responsible for the first baptism of an enslaved infant in Louisville that was documented. Those records survive at Christ Church Episcopal Cathedral. It was difficult to see. Definitely ask about that story. That story is insane. So she's responsible for that. So this child's baptism record survives, is in Louisville, Kentucky. And then they moved back to Loudoun County in 1838 to Clifton Plantation, which was just down the road from Langolan. So again, she's avoided a worst case scenario. She's back in a community where she has lots of bonds and friends and close to her family. She would rather not be separated from them at all, but she is back in a community that she knows very well. And it's about this time at Clifton Plantation that she met and married her husband, Charles Bingham, who was at a neighboring plantation called Welburn, another couple of miles down the road. Like literally her life is a timeline from west to east along Millsville Road. And when we understand how, the distance with those plantations and the fact that they met and married, it tells us a lot about how the enslaved community out there were socializing, communicating with one another and building families across these plantations. And I am in touch with everybody that's doing the research out there, and so our work overlaps a lot. Charles Bingham being on a different plantation from where the Powells were. Now, there's lots more incidents in her life, but I'm going to fast forward to the moment, and it's cut off on the screen, where she was sold in 1851. Remember how the Powells went to Henry, Illinois? That was a free state, and so they sold all of their enslaved people. And so Ariana faced every enslaved mother's worst nightmare, because they lived every day under the threat of their children being sold. And she knew that the Powells were capable of it because a few years earlier at Langolan, Cuthbert Powell had died, and the entire enslaved community was obliterated in an afternoon at an auction, including her parents. So she knew that this was a risk, but this woman somehow convinced everybody involved to sell her to the Welburn plantation, where she and her children, she kept her children, and she was reunited with her spouse. He had his wife and children for the first time, so that they lived together as a family unit for the rest of their lives. And they went through the Civil War at Welburn Farm, and a lot is known about the Civil War at Welburn. A local woman here in Williamsburg wrote a book called The Delaney's of Welburn, and a lot is known, so we know what Ariana's experience was at Llangollen. And here's a larger picture of Llangollen. I could do I won't. We're ending now, but like the plantation is intact. It is, and largely Southwest Loudoun is intact. It has not been developed. They have their original 18th century dirt roads, and there's a huge effort in Northern Virginia to keep it that way and not let those roads get paved, and to keep it, they're putting easements on the property to make sure that it doesn't get developed. So I hit the jackpot twice, both with the Powell Family papers existing and the fact that this whole landscape is as it was in the 19th century. And I'm very grateful to the owner of Llangollen. His name is Mr. Brennan. He was an executive for Morgan Stanley. He's been very generous with the site, has me out. He is more interested in the history of the enslaved people at this site than he is even in the Powells. And when he found out how much I knew about this enslaved community there, he had me come back out, took me up the mountain to see some of the structures that they had built on the mountain. And then, very end, we're going to wrap up with the famous descendant. I was talking to my therapist about this earlier this week. And he was like, oh, it's kind of like Henry Louis Gates Jr. at the end. Like, everybody's got some famous cousin. I told him, I was like, I'm going to use that. And so Katharine Hepburn. So Nina Powell was Katharine Hepburn's grandmother. So Katharine Hepburn had very deep roots in Virginia. Her dad grew up in Hanover. Yep. And also, another William and Mary connection, Nina's son founded the William and Mary football team. That was in 1893. His name was Charles Hepburn. Here's a fun side-by-side of Katharine Hepburn. That's when she was at Bryn Mawr with her grandmother next to her. I think they look alike, but it's also helpful that their heads are turned the same way, their hair's dark and it's pulled back. Oh, there's lots of helpful things here. The Powells were, again, very unusual and exceptional people, and it becomes less surprising that Katharine Hepburn would come from them. And she knew this. She knew the Powell family history. She had a portion of the Powell family papers herself, and when she died in 2003, her estate left instructions to have the papers donated to William and Mary, and that's referred to as the Hepburn edition to the Powell family papers. So lots of nieces and nephews have gone to William and Mary. So there was a William and Mary connection. The papers came here through Nina's granddaughter, donated them in the mid-1940s. Showed up and donated them all then. And then the next portion came with Katharine Hepburn. So that concludes my presentation, and I want to say thank you all. I appreciate it. That's very sweet.